What if the world you wake up in is not the world your soul remembers? What if behind every ordinary moment, behind the noise, the patterns, the glittering distractions, there pulses an ancient rhythm, whispering a truth too sacred to be spoken aloud? Somewhere along the way we forgot, not by accident but by design. We were taught to look outward, to climb, to conquer, and in doing so, we turned away from something eternal, something old, something that still watches us in dreams and déjà vu. But the fact that you're here now, listening, sensing, wondering, it means something. It means a deeper part of you has stirred, the part that remembers. The part that knows you were never just a body or a name or a role to perform. You were and still are a spark of something immeasurable. This video isn't here to teach you. It's here to remind you, to unlock the memory sealed in silence, to shift your vision not outward but inward, toward the hidden architecture of the soul and the sacred order that binds all things. What you're about to hear may not just change your mind, it may return you to yourself. So take a breath, deeper than usual. Let go of everything you thought you knew just for now. You're not here by chance. This is a beginning, and beginnings are always sacred. They told us the afterlife was hidden behind golden doors, beneath massive stones that only kings could afford to rest under. But the Egyptians, in their quiet brilliance, whispered a different truth. You don't need gold to enter eternity. You need clarity. For centuries, their sacred writings evolved. First, the pyramid texts, etched into stone walls deep within royal tombs, available only to the divine elite. Then came the coffin texts, painted on wooden sarcophagi of nobles and officials. But it was the scrolls we now call the Egyptian Book of the Dead that broke the mold. These were not exclusive to the powerful. They could be commissioned by merchants, artists, midwives. For the first time, the journey to the afterlife became a path anyone could walk, if and only if they were willing to face themselves. This wasn't a democratic gesture. It was a spiritual evolution. The cosmos was no longer bound to bloodlines. It responded to awareness. In this, the ancient Egyptians dared to assert, truth, not title, determines one's fate beyond the veil. That shift in energy is seismic. It tells us that the soul's liberation does not begin with wealth or status, but with intention and understanding. The rituals were precise, yes, but the true key wasn't in the incense or the offering bowls. It was in knowing who you really were. Imagine a society that built pyramids taller than imagination, telling you that your heart is the only measure of your eternity, that your choices, unseen by the world, are weighed against a single feather. In a time where kings were buried with treasures, the real treasure became the soul's alignment with Mad, the principle of balance, truth, cosmic order. When we read these texts now, we tend to reduce them to myth or magic. But what if they were never meant to be read as superstition, but as an ancient psychological map? A manual for dying, yes, but also a brutally honest guide for living. Every spell, every invocation, every coded symbol is a mirror, not for the dead, but for the living who have forgotten how to see. This is the paradox the Egyptians knew well. You cannot prepare for death unless you are fully alive. Not alive in the sense of movement or breathing, but in presence. In the fierce willingness to stand still in your own truth, to name your fears, to understand your shadow without judgment, to declare, as they did, I have not lied. I have not stolen. I have not made others weep. They weren't listing commandments. They were listing consciousness. They were reminding us, you will be asked at the threshold who you have been, and the one asking will be your own heart. So this journey does not begin in a tomb. It begins now, with the breath you just took, with the question you just felt in your chest, with the quiet knowing that maybe, just maybe, this isn't a story about ancient gods at all. Maybe it's a story about you, about whether you're willing to wake up or keep wandering through your life asleep. Buried deep within the scrolls of the Book of the Dead lies spell 125. Not a charm, not an incantation for summoning spirits or warding off demons, but something far more confronting. A declaration, a reckoning. 42 confessions whispered not to the gods but to the self. I have not stolen, I have not murdered, I have not caused pain, I have not acted with deceit. It is not dramatic, it is disarming. Because here, in this single passage, we are no longer spectators to ancient mystery. We are participants. The Egyptians did not design spell 125 to appease deities. They wrote it to measure the soul's weight not in gold but in truth. It asks the only question that truly matters. Who have you been when no one was watching? The scene is stark and unforgettable. Your heart, still pulsing with memory, is placed on a celestial scale. On the other side, the feather of Mad, the essence of divine order and justice. No lawyer, no defense. No spell can rewrite what your energy has already recorded. If your heart is heavy with guilt, resentment, betrayal, the scale tips and you disappear. Not punished, forgotten. But if your heart is light, not from perfection, but from honesty, humility, and the courage to grow, the doors open. You pass, you rise, you live again truer than before. This was their gospel. Salvation does not come through devotion, but through self-confrontation. The gods are not gatekeepers, they are witnesses. You are the test. This flips everything. It strips away the rituals and robes and leaves us naked, asking, if I were judged by who I truly am, not what I post, not what I say, would I pass? And here, where the comment section becomes more powerful than any spell. Again and again, viewers don't ask for secret magic. They ask for meaning. They tell stories of hitting bottom, of searching for more than affirmations and vision boards. They aren't looking for light shows. They're looking for lightness in their spirit, in their past, in the chance to begin again. One viewer confessed, I thought manifestation was a scam until I realized it's about seeing myself clearly. Another wrote, that book didn't tell me how to be better. It showed me who I already was. So ask yourself now, not at the end, not when it's too late, but right here, in the silence after this sentence. If your heart were weighed today, would it rise? This is not fear, this is freedom, because the truth is, there is no hell in this cosmology, only forgetting, only heaviness, only disconnection from your own essence. But if you choose awareness, if you choose integrity, if you choose to come back into alignment, not with society, not with performance, but with your soul, then you are already halfway across the threshold. Imagine this. Not a courtroom with gavel and jury, but a silent chamber beyond time. Your heart, not your mind, not your story, is placed on the scale. Opposite it rests a feather, light as breath, symbol of man, the ancient principle of truth, justice, and universal order. This isn't mythology, it's metaphysics. The Egyptians were not naive in their symbolism. They understood something that psychology only recently began to echo. Every thought, every action leaves an imprint on the emotional field we carry in our bodies, in our hearts. What you do, what you say, even what you suppress, it gathers weight. And over time, that weight becomes your atmosphere. Your fate is not a punishment. It's the gravity of your own choices. The weighing of the heart was not about fear of divine wrath. It was a ritualized reminder that nothing escapes the law of energetic cause and effect. Karma is not a reward system. It's a mirror. What you put out doesn't come back because someone's keeping score. It comes back because energy seeks balance. One modern viewer put it perfectly. The heart doesn't lie. I wasn't cursed. I was carrying the consequences of patterns I never questioned. This is where ancient myth becomes spiritual technology. Because when you realize that your sorrow isn't punishment, it's accumulated density, something shifts. When you realize that your numbness isn't random, it's the echo of choices that dulled your inner voice, you begin to see hope flicker. Not because someone will save you, but because now you understand what's weighing you down. That's the hidden brilliance of the Book of the Dead. It never offers a savior, it offers a mirror. And in that mirror, we meet both our terror and our liberation. The judgment of the heart is not a sentence. It's a signal. If it's heavy, we adjust. We forgive, we let go. If it's light, we stay the course. We expand. No deity is holding a grudge. No God is measuring your worth with a stopwatch. Only you and your energy can tip the scale. And here's the quiet miracle. Every moment is a chance to lighten your heart. Every breath is a chance to speak truth. Every difficult forgiveness, every brave confession, every release of an old resentment, its weight leaving the scale. That's why even in the face of anxiety and shame, the heart ceremony is not a horror story. It's an invitation. You don't need perfection. You need presence. Because the true afterlife isn't after death. It's the lightness we find within ourselves now. We've been conditioned to fear the underworld, to imagine it as a place of torment ruled by fire and demons. But the Egyptians gave it another name, Duat. Not a punishment, a passage. Not a prison, a map of the soul's own forgotten terrain. The Duat was said to stretch across 12 gates or 12 hours of night. But these were not merely stages of death. They were initiations. Each gate reflected a layer of the unconscious that every soul must face. Fear, craving, illusion, denial, regret, shame. These gates are not locked by gods. They are guarded by our own resistance. To pass through them was not to escape damnation, but to reclaim memory. We meet the serpent not because we've sinned, but because there's a part of us we've refused to acknowledge. We wander lakes of darkness because we've pushed away grief. We battle shadowy figures because we've made peace with comfort over truth. And suddenly, it begins to look familiar. Because who among us hasn't wandered these gates in life? When you're lost in a season of depression, when you're spiraling in anxiety with no name for it, when you wake up with success and still feel empty, when you realize you've lived years without ever touching your soul. That is Duat. That is the underworld, not beneath you, but inside you. And this is what makes the Book of the Dead revolutionary. It doesn't save you from Duat, it equips you to walk through it. Spell by spell, name by name, symbol by symbol, it becomes a guide for navigating inner chaos with awareness instead of fear. In this sacred map, the soul doesn't avoid its darkness, it integrates it. The ancient scribes did not hand you a key, they handed you a torch. And they knew every descent into Duat is not an exile, it's a calling. The path of awakening isn't paved with light, it begins in shadows. So if you are in a place in your life right now where nothing makes sense, where the structures have collapsed, where the gods seem silent and your name barely feels your own, maybe you haven't lost your way. Maybe you've just stepped into the gate of Hour 4. Maybe the walls that feel like death are just the passage toward rebirth. The Duat, in the end, was never a place. It is a state of becoming. And like every great journey, it only asks one thing: keep going. In the Egyptian underworld, the soul could not pass through a single gate unless it knew the true name of the being guarding it. The name wasn't just a password, it was a portal. To know the name of a thing was to hold its essence. To name a god was to summon its power. But more importantly, to name a fear was to strip it of its dominion. This is not myth. This is the psychology of transformation. The Egyptians understood what modern thinkers like Carl Jung would later echo. The unconscious rules us until we make it conscious. And the only way to make it conscious is to give it a name. When you say, "This is shame," it loses its camouflage. When you whisper, "This is grief," it stops pretending to be anger. When you look at your life and admit, "This is fear," something remarkable happens, the energy begins to shift. You don't fight shadows by swinging at the air. You name them. You call them into the light. That is why the Book of the Dead was so detailed, not to overwhelm, but to empower. Every spell it offered, every incantation, was designed to awaken recognition. This wasn't magical thinking. It was spiritual clarity. The soul survived Duat not by force, but by awareness. By knowing the names of gods, yes, but also by knowing the names of its own inner demons. This is echoed in the words of one viewer who said, "The hidden Jung files helped me see what I was blind to." That's not metaphor. That's the moment the unconscious becomes seen and therefore freed. The modern soul is still walking through Duat. Only now the monsters wear different masks: addiction, distraction, perfectionism, self-doubt. And just like the old gods, they guard the gates of awakening. You cannot bypass them, but you can speak their name. And when you do, when you dare to say, "I am afraid of being unseen," or "I am still carrying betrayal," or even just "I am lost," you are not collapsing. You are opening. You are initiating yourself. In the Egyptian worldview, this act was not weakness. It was mastery. To name your shadow is to begin transmutation. To look into the dark and say, "I know you," is the first step toward becoming light. The Book of the Dead is not just a guide for what happens after we die. It is a reminder that nothing changes in this world or the next until we speak truth to what lies hidden. And sometimes the bravest word we'll ever say is simply, "This is me." The Egyptian journey does not end in survival. It culminates in metamorphosis. For those who passed the trials of the Duat, the reward was not merely peace or reunion. It was divinization. The soul, once human, now became Osiris, not metaphorically, but energetically. To become Osiris was to transcend identity and fuse with the pulse of the cosmos. This was never about salvation in the way we understand it today. The Egyptians weren't seeking escape. They were preparing for elevation. And so they spoke spells that began with two deceptively simple words: I am. I am the lotus blooming at dawn. I am the falcon soaring with Horus. I am the flame that purifies. I am the light that rises with Ra. These were not affirmations meant to impress the gods. They were declarations meant to reorder the self. Through sound, through word, through energy, the soul was not asking for permission. It was reclaiming its origin. This is more than mysticism. It is energetic precision. Every time you speak your truth, not the one the world gave you, but the one you remembered in silence, you shift your frequency. You stop vibrating at the level of fear and begin resonating with the current of creation. In the Book of the Dead, this is the final act, not judgment but rebirth, and it echoes through our lives today. In one comment, a viewer wrote, "I don't need comfort, I need awakening." That sentence could have been carved into a temple wall, because awakening doesn't soothe you, it scorches you. It dissolves your illusions. It asks more of you than comfort ever could. But in return, it gives you something that no ritual can fake: remembrance. To become divine in the Egyptian tradition did not mean becoming untouchable. It meant becoming whole. Every scar integrated, every shadow seen, every gate passed not because you were perfect, but because you refused to stay asleep. This is the secret buried beneath the spells. The gods were not above you. They were waiting inside you. And once you remembered their names, once you spoke your truth in the tongue of stars, you didn't become someone else. You became who you've always been. Not dust, not victim, not even seeker, but light. In the final chapters of the Book of the Dead, there is no throne, no choir of angels, no eternal sleep. Instead, there is the field of reeds, a place that looks a lot like Earth, only lighter, brighter, balanced. Here, the soul lives not in idle bliss, but in harmony. It plants crops. It gathers with ancestors. It walks among rivers of light and listens to the wind that remembers its name. But there is no suffering, no striving, no sense of lack. This is not escape, it's completion. The Egyptians did not believe that paradise meant doing nothing. They believed true peace meant doing everything from a place of freedom. The soul still acts, still creates, still loves, but now without bondage to the ego, without the weight of proving, defending, or fearing. This is profoundly close to what modern therapy calls inner peace. Not the absence of responsibility, but the absence of distortion. To be in the field of reeds is to move from essence, not compulsion. To speak from soul, not survival. To live, finally, as who you truly are, not what you've had to become. And here lies one of the most beautiful truths whispered by the ancient texts. No two paradises are alike. The field of reeds is not one size fits all. It is tailored like the scrolls to the soul's journey. You don't enter someone else's heaven. You enter the reality shaped by your awakening. What you loved purely becomes eternal. What you released returns as grace. What you understood is etched in the walls of your peace. The message is clear. The universe is not mechanical. It is intimate, and it remembers who you've become. So this is not the end. This is the return to yourself, to truth, to the divine rhythm that carried you all along. And now, with nothing left to hide, nothing left to fear, you do what every liberated soul has always done. You walk forward. To the ancient Egyptians, immortality wasn't secured by wealth or even virtue. It was secured by remembrance. They called it Ren, your name, your essence. As long as your name was spoken, as long as it lived in another's heart or voice, your soul endured. This wasn't sentiment, it was spiritual physics. Temples were carved not only to praise the gods, but to inscribe names in stone. Tombs weren't just for bodies, they were for the echo of identity. The Egyptians knew. When your name is forgotten, so are you, not symbolically, energetically. And so, life became a series of sacred inscriptions, not on walls, but on others. Each action, each choice, each moment of presence was a line etched into the memory of the world. Not fame, not noise, but legacy. The kind that whispers through generations. Today we call this impact, resonance, energy exchange. But the ancients said it plainly. As long as your name is remembered, you walk in the light. Now ask yourself, what are you leaving behind? Not in titles, not in possessions, but in the way you made someone feel, in the truth you lived, in the love you offered. That's Ren. That's the part of you that outlasts even the most permanent tomb. And if you stepped into the Duat tonight, not in metaphor, but for real, who would say your name with reverence, with love, with gratitude? Because that is the true final question. Not whether you passed the tests, not whether you knew the spells, but whether your presence in this life mattered enough to echo beyond it. The Book of the Dead does not end with closure. It ends with continuation. Your name travels forward, carried not by ink or stone, but by the hearts you touched. So choose your words carefully. Choose your actions even more so, because somewhere in this great dance of stars and silence, your name is being written. Make it one worth remembering. The Book of the Dead was never just a guide for the afterlife. It was a sacred reminder for the living, for those who have been moving through the world with heavy hearts, forgotten names, and silent questions. It does not speak to corpses. It speaks to those who have stopped listening. If you found yourself here, watching this, searching through symbols and spells and myths older than empires, you're not chasing prophecy. You're reaching for something deeper, a map, a way back to the part of you that never forgot who you are. This text was always meant to be read by the breathing. Its wisdom doesn't begin when the heart stops. It begins when the soul stirs, when you realize the journey through Duat is already underway. The tests, the gates, the monsters, they're here now disguised as your choices, your patterns, your resistance to change. And still the invitation stands. Return. Reclaim your light. Speak your truth. Live as though your name is already being carved into eternity. So if something in this video felt precise, If the timing felt uncanny, if a part of you whispered, "I've needed this," know this wasn't random. Know your soul has been waiting. The Book of the Dead didn't find you. You were ready to remember it.